Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this 2025-2026 FAFSA tutorial. The Future Makers Coalition aims to transform Southwest Florida's workforce by increasing the proportion of working age adults with college degrees, workforce certificates, industry certifications, and other high-quality credentials to 55%. Future Makers is a collective impact initiative working along the cradle to career pathway to create a skilled and sustainable workforce pipeline. The pathway begins with early childhood learning and ends with post-high school credential attainment and career connections. The coalition focuses on system change to connect untapped workforce with the education and training to fill in demand jobs by removing attainment barriers and creating a culture of career exploration and aspiration from an early age. No single entity can transform our workforce, and so Future Makers Coalition is a network of over 180 cross-sector partners that include businesses, school districts, post-secondary schools, community organizations, and members. And so today we're working with one of our partners, and so I'm going to go ahead and transition over to Lydia Rupinski from Florida Southwestern State College to go over the FAFSA information, what you need to know, and preparation for the 25-26 FAFSA.
Thank you. Hi again, guys. Once again, my name is Lydia Rupinski. I'm the Communications and Outreach Person for Florida Southwestern State College. So the slide that I'm going to start us with is we're going to walk through a lot of the pages that the student would see in order with the 25-26 FAFSA. Now, the one thing I would like to emphasize right from the get-go is that we do recommend that the student have a verified account with the FAFSA. You know, it's called your FSA ID. So it's where you're providing your name, your date of birth, and your social security number. And when the account is created, we have to give the Social Security Administration time to confirm you're you. I will say you want to make sure you're putting your name exactly how it appears on your social security card. That includes if you have two last names, a hyphen or a space between them. And and because it can verify without that, but it is worthwhile to do that. And this is both for the student and the parent. So we're starting this FAFSA, and the way that we're completing it today is like it is a dependent student. So student that's around the ages of 18 to 24 traditionally, that is not married, that does not have a dependent of their own, and is not in active military service, because those are the students that are considered dependents by FAFSA terms. So there's two different ways that someone could go onto the FAFSA website. You can type FAFSA just into Google, or just studentaid.gov, and it will show that you can start a new form or edit an existing form after you've logged in. If you started the FAFSA for 25-26, you always want to go back to edit existing forms. But if you haven't touched it at all, then we click on the Start New Form. The students, like I said, have to have an account. It's important for them to also save this account because, like I said, they're going to verify your account with your name, your date of birth, and your social. So it's really, really important that we recommend that the student is saving these login information because the account is forever in a password manager or in the notes in their phone, something that could be saved on the cloud. So even if they lose their device, they still have access, or it's not in like just a notebook that could get lost or confiscated. Now, I will say that if you're ever working with a student and they're having issues logging into an account that they insist that they've already created, try and have them make a new account, because the thing is, if the student's account is not fully verified, like they didn't verify their email especially, they might not have gone all the way through with finalizing that account. So when you're working with these students and they're saying, oh, I have an account, and they're using these logins and they insist this is what it is, try that. Or they've got to do account recovery. And one thing is once they've used one password, they cannot use it again. And they cannot just make a new account if their social is listed on the government website. So once we have them all logged in, everything has gone smoothly. Of course, if we're on the dependent side, they're going to be selecting that they are a student. There are going to be 4 separate videos they can choose to watch that are going to kind of give them a little additional clarity. It's not required to. If you want to go to the YouTube page and type in like studentaid.gov, they have their own account on YouTube where students can refer back to these videos should they so decide. But just know they're not required. Um, After that's been done, they go through the 4 videos. Everything that is on this particular page, the student identity information, is stuff that was pulled from their FSA ID, from their FAFSA account. So this is their last chance before doing the rest of the FAFSA to make sure they have put everything correctly on there. You'll mention again that I mentioned the student has 2 last names and they failed to provide both of them. I will say statistically, this is most common with Hispanic and Latino students, but I mean, there's probably other students too that this rule could apply. The way you would fix this, if the student then notices, oh, in this case, oh, I'm not just Jenny E. Price, I'm Jenny E. Price Lopez. The way that they're going to have to update this information is not in the FAFSA form. They're going to want to leave the FAFSA form and they're going to click on their name and go to the settings, because in the settings they can update all of their personal information. The only thing they really cannot change after it's been verified is their social, which makes sense. That shouldn't really ever change. So this is something to keep in mind when you're working with a student, that they are aware. They really need to make sure the stuff is right, because if they don't get it right and the FAFSA gets sent over, we will have to make them go back and fix it when it arrives at a school like my own. And then dependent student state of legal residence and providing consent. Main thing is, it's just about where is the student living. Unless they recently moved to like Florida, most of them, they're just going to put the month and year that they started becoming, a resident of Florida. And this doesn't mean that they were immediately a citizen or a permanent resident. I mean, this is when people knew they were living in Florida. So month and year. And the further it goes back in time, the less important that it is exact, really. So just make sure that they're aware of that. And the next page that happens after that is the consent and approval. And it's just saying, hey, as long as you provide your consent, we're going to pull information that we already have from government agencies to fill a good portion of this FAFSA. This is the convenience of the new FAFSA, is that it is allowing so much more information to just get autofilled that the government already has, so the student isn't getting caught up in questions and wording they might not fully understand. So a lot of times a student might end up with that yellow bar underneath, and it's probably because they didn't file their taxes in 2023, which if you're dealing with a high school senior is very normal. But a lot of times for the parents, you're going to see a green bar instead on that little second image, saying that the data had been retrieved. Because that's when they're really tapping into the IRS, is right at that moment. So with the dependent personal circumstances, most of the stuff is pretty self-explanatory. A lot of our students, our undergrad students, are probably going to be single, and they are going to be doing, it's probably their very first year in college, and it does usually auto assume that the student doesn't have their first bachelor's degree. And this is a very important thing, that the student is taking their time. And remember that the student has an account and a parent has an account. So everything that the student is answering over here is all student related. And there's a dead giveaway right at the top where next to FAFSA form 2526, it will show student. And in this case, the example student is Jenny Price. So this is all relating to Jenny, not her mom, not her dad. Now, this particular area is something that you want to pay attention to. Now, most of the students that you're going to be encountering are going to have none of these apply for student personal circumstances. However, if the student is in active military duty, the student has dependents of their own, like they have a baby or a child, or they like aged out of foster care, or, were considered a ward of the court, legally emancipated minor. And the only other one and this is the one that is very important, is because we have a lot of students that end up kind of just living with their grandparents. So all of these circumstances, if a student selects anything beyond none of the above, they have to have supporting documentation that correlates exactly with this. And the one that I find that most often confuses people is the second to last option. The student is or was in a legal guardianship with someone other than their parent or step parent as determined by a court in their state of residence. And this is where I'm saying a lot of students are living with grandma and grandpa. However, the one thing I will mention is most of these students only have temporary guardianship. Doesn't matter that they've been living with grandma and grandpa their entire life. I often don't see families following all the way through with permanent legal guardianship in the court system because it's honestly more money and they just don't feel like it's worth their time at the time. So if the student's wanting to select this, you need to make sure that they have documents, and on those court documents, it shows permanent legal guardianship, because once this FAFSA gets sent over to the school, that's exactly what I'm going to be looking for. If it's not the case and it's temporary guardianship, which is fairly normal, there is an alternative. The most important thing is that they're still going to select none of these apply here. And you want to remind them that they're going to need to follow up with someone like me at the school they're planning to go to. There is a workaround. We do these all the time. This one is another one sometimes that causes a little bit of confusion for homelessness status. Main thing is, if the student is living with friends or anyone else they are not biologically related to / not married to, and they have no contact with their parents, they need to select yes to this. This is another student that, of course, we would recommend that they follow up with this as soon as possible. Once again, documentation is key. Sometimes I have students who have what is called McKinney-Vento paperwork, which shows they are a documented homeless student. But sometimes students, like I have students who are maybe around 20, 21, who are not talking to their parents, and but they're completely self-sufficient. They're paying their own rent. They're not in a financial stress situation. They would also be considered not homeless. But of course, we would still need documentation for them on why they cannot provide parent information. So just something to keep in mind is this is very few students, but it's something you want to be very mindful that we are asking the right questions and they have the right documents. Now, this is the one that's kind of the catch-all. So remember how I mentioned that there's going to be students who have temporary guardianship. There's going to be a student that could be in a homelessness situation. Or well, not in a homelessness situation where they're like 20, 21, they're fully self-sufficient. They are living in their own place, paying their own rent and everything like that. But these are all people, all students who have no safe or regular contact with their parents. That is the key wording there, because then they would switch this from no to yes. That is what this is specifically for, is for those students who cannot safely talk to their parents or locate them because they are completely estranged. And then once again, following up with someone like me as soon as they can, because then we can help them with the workaround and the additional documents. Because even if they don't have as many official documents, we can gather alternatives. This is the one that, fortunately for this year, they have already updated where it auto responds no, and that's ideal because last year when this FAFSA first launched, we had an issue of some students collecting yes. So for the direct unsubsidized loan question, they should only be selecting yes if they are in safe regular contact with their parents, but the parent is refusing to provide their information on the FAFSA. They do not want to do it for whatever reason. I will say, once again, we will need a follow up signed statement from the parent saying, I refuse. So just to keep in mind that most students I encounter, because this is very rare that I have a yes for this question, it should stay no. And it does auto load now as no. One other note I will mention is that if you do encounter a parent who's reluctant, see if they'll talk to someone like me, because oftentimes parents are concerned that, their information is going to get sent from the FAFSA to other agencies and things like that, or that's going to affect their credit score, and it doesn't. So sometimes when we have that kind of conversation, it makes parents much more receptible receiving to complete the FAFSA. Dependent students. Tell us about your parents. So this is another section where the student is going to just fill out the series of questions, and it's flowing much more naturally in a way that would make sense for the average student. The previous form I felt had some confusion, so it really does break this down. So if the parent is divorced or separated, and this is currently, because remember, this FAFSA will ask for tax information from 2023, but that is not necessarily what we want, is what was happening in 2023. What matters is what's happening right now. We always say the FAFSA is a snapshot in time of what the student situation is right now. So even if mom and dad filed taxes jointly in 2023, we are only asking for those tax information because that was the earliest we could ask for. This particular FAFSA has been available since December of 2024, and no one filed their taxes in 2024 in December because it wasn't over yet. So that's the method to the madness there. So that's why I'm saying it's really, really important that the student is aware of what their current family situation is, because that determines the contributors. So if the parent is divorced or separated or going through those motions, the answer is going to be no here. And at that point, we'll only ask for one. There are a series of questions here where even if they've been divorced or separated, it will ask, hey, did this particular parent remarry? And that's the thing, is that often students don't realize they got to put their step parent in there. So something to be mindful for. And then we get to the next page. Now, a lot of times if you're working with a student and the parent is not physically available or cannot be put on the phone, this might be the stopping point for the student of that day. But the most important thing, this is why I was recommending that both the student and the parent have their accounts already verified by the SSA, because what the student fills out here is going to be the invite that gets sent to the parent, and it will only link to the parent's account if everything matches exactly. So if the student forgets to put the second last name that mom has on their account, it will not connect. If the student puts a space after one of the names, it will not connect. It has to match exactly name, date of birth, social, and ideally email as well. And that's the email associated with the parent account. Usually we only need one parent account if the parents filed their taxes jointly, but if there's any recent changes in marital status, or the parents might have filed their taxes as a married filed separate return, then they will both need to have their own accounts. If the student is able to send off their parent, because the parent will get an email, but the best way to connect is the parent just logs in and connects. Afterwards, it's just student demographics. This has absolutely no effect on their FAFSA or their outcome. It's really just the Department of Ed probably gathering data of the types of students that are completing it. The only other thing I can think of that they would use this for is to confirm different backgrounds for certain scholarships or aid programs at their intended schools, but they can choose to omit all this information if they wish. The dependent student citizenship status. So it is once again very, very important that the student is filling out their residency status exactly how it is. So if once again, if they tell that you're a U.S. citizen and they're a permanent resident, which is the eligible non-citizen option here, then unfortunately it'll get flagged and they will need to correct their FAFSA. So if they have, if they're a legal permanent resident, aka, they have their green card, there is a number they need to fill in there. And if they're unsure, there is a list on studentaid.gov of eligible non-citizens, like students who have an approved asylum status. Um, they have any other type of documentation that can allow us, because there are some workarounds besides permanent residency, but I will say if you see a student usually with just employment authorization cards or on their social security card, besides their name and their social, there's additional lettering. There's a very good chance they might not be eligible for FAFSA yet. And at which point, once again, we would like to connect them with alternative resources. Because at that very last option, neither US citizen nor eligible non-citizen, the FAFSA just goes, you can't get anything then, not from this anyway. Dependent student parent educational status. Once again, that question really pertains to certain scholarships. If the student has parents who never attended college, there's one that's called that are first generation scholarships. But some of this stuff is once again for statistical and data purposes. Parents killed in the line of duty. So that's another thing where if they do unfortunately have a deceased parent while serving, that they are self-identifying on the FAFSA, because there are certain veteran benefits that the student will not be eligible for if the answer is yes and they select no. So when in doubt, have them check with their parents to make sure. Student high school completion status, once again, very self-explanatory. That most of them will probably have a high school diploma that they are either have received or are going to receive this coming May. And they just put in where the state, the city, the name of the school, and it should show up. They don't necessarily have to type in fully high school, because sometimes I find the FAFSA gets a little confirm it, and we just kind of go from there. Dependent student financials. Once again, this is relating to 2023 taxes. If you're dealing with a high school senior, statistically, there's very unlikely that they have, but always double check, because I have come across some high school students who have. But that's the thing, is they see this 2023 IRS form 1040, they have no idea what that means, and that's what it is. This is what the taxes look like, once again, if they answer yes. And once again, most of this stuff is going to get auto-filled as long as they have been able to successfully have the data retrieval tool. And most of these sort of things will be zero for a lot of people. But I mean, I would recommend when you're working with somebody and then you start seeing these questions show up, they should have their 1040s in front of them. They should have their 2023 taxes in front of them. And a lot of these, you can kind of, you'll notice on some of them, there's little information points next to the decimal points that'll kind of elaborate on where they can find this information. But most of it is on the first 2 pages of the 1040. Sometimes you might need to look at the schedules 1, 2, 3, but not always. This is the assets one. And even if the student hadn't filed taxes, it's going to ask them for assets. I mean, the most important thing I always say is how much money do you have saved specifically that you are spending for school? Because at this moment, if the student has money saved up that they're planning to buy a car in like the immediate future or used car, I would not put that on here because that money is not going to be there when they start school. It's about the money that's going to be there when they start school, that they are planning and save for. So obviously then the second question of current net worth of investments, including real estate, that's going to probably be zero for most of our students because they do not own property. And also for businesses, if they don't have any cash value of a business yet, that's also mostly zero for the dependent students. Now, they can select up to 20 schools. So the next page, you're able to select up to 20 schools. And I always recommend any school that student is considering, have them put it on here because it's just basically the way that the school is receiving permission to load their FAFSA. If the student goes to a school and they didn't list it on here on the FAFSA, the school cannot legally access it. They cannot load it. So it's really, really important that you just list anything they are eligible for, and that's why they can list up to 20 schools. And then there's just a review page. They can go back to any section that they've already done, click on the little expanded areas and review. But once we get to the very bottom, they can just click continue. They are signing it and they are saying that they're putting everything true, as they on here. They agreed that if they take loans, they're going to pay them back, all that sort of stuff. So they just sign. And then it says that their section is complete. And you can see here that Miss Jenny Price had sent an invite to Mark Price. So he needs to now log on to his parent account to complete that section. But this is what the screen looks like for the student. So the parent little email is going to look like this here on the left. But as I mentioned, the easiest way for them to just have a smooth access to it is they just log in to their account, to their parent account to complete the parent section. And what they'll do is they'll notice that it says here, Jenny Price wants your help on the FAFSA form. So now Dad can accept the invitation and start the parent section. And I will say that much of the beginning and everything is practically identical to the student section. But the most important thing in the way that the parents and students can tell the difference is at the top of the screen next to FAFSA 2526, it says parent of Jenny Price. So not only do we know we're on the parent account, we know who this FAFSA is for, just in case the parent gets confused because maybe they have multiple students in the household going to college that year. So once again, the parent provides consent. It loads up tax information. The parent can confirm their marital status. Once again, it's about what was happening now, not in 2023. So if there is a recent change, once again, it's a good idea for them to have their taxes ready to go. And then it also, because it triggers taxes, it's going to ask, hey, did you get any sort of government benefits in 23, 24? That includes food stamps, Medicaid, Social Security income, all those sort of things. The parent needs to be aware of that. It asks if they filed their taxes. And I will say that the 1040, for those who aren't familiar, is a general tax form page that usually is an overview of all the other tax forms. Because sometimes when you file your taxes, you have a nice big PDF or big stack of papers, but the 1040, it's usually about 2 pages and it's like a summary page of everything inside. So most of the information you need will be on those first 2 pages, with a few exceptions. The other thing that it is important that the parent pays attention to is how many dependents is the parent financially supporting. And even if they hadn't reported some dependents on their taxes from 2023, like what if a baby was born in between? This is a good time to indicate, because it'll ask if if the amount of family or dependents is different than what they file in their 2023 taxes. And if there's a new baby, then the answer is yes. So they want to make sure that they are filling it in. And it will show this nice little breakdown here of the family size, who is the parent, if there's a spouse, the student, and then any other children. So that's why it says under here where you can add a number, do not include the student applicant for any other dependents. This also includes grandma and grandpa. So if mom or dad are supporting grandma and grandpa more than 50% in their household, they can be included here too. That's something really important to be aware of. And then out of everybody that is in this particular household, how many are going to be in college this upcoming school year? And so on here, it just indicated Jenny, but that could change if there's multiple students. All righty. So the so there was the dependent students tax return. Now we're at the parents. Almost all the questions, you're going to find on the 1040 W-2s, W-4s, 1099s for work-related income. And you just kind of carry it over. Like I said, some of these questions that show up on the FAFSA, there's a little info box you can select that will show you exactly where you can find some of this tax information. Yeah, and most of it will honestly autofill, especially like the income from work and everything like that. Sometimes parents don't even have to fill out any of this uh, almost at all because of that. If they Now, I will say parents should take their time with the asset questions. Did they receive any child support if they're divorced or separated? Once again, with the assets, it's about did they have any money saved for the student for college? If they did, they got to report it. And the one thing I will say when it comes to the second question with real estate and investments is number one, they do not count the house that they live in. They do not count the house that they live in, their permanent resident. If they have multiple homes or multiple properties, they need to take into account the cash value after any sort of mortgages or loans they have related to the properties. So they might not have to report as much as they think because it's all about if the parent was to liquidate their assets, sell everything today, how much physical cash would they actually have that they could just spend towards the student's education? That's the main question. The second one, same thing for the business. If they were to sell the business, liquidate it completely, minus business loans or anything else that they owe for maintaining the business, how much is the cash value of that? And that's why this is really, really important that they are taking their time to answer these questions factually so they aren't putting in hyperinflated numbers that aren't an accurate reflection of what could potentially have been liquidated. Sometimes when the parent is completing their section, they need to add in their other spouse just so they are aware that they're filling out the FAFSA and autofilling the sort of information. Oftentimes, the second spouse doesn't necessarily need to log in to confirm unless there have been recent changes or if one of the parents was a victim of identity theft or the taxes were amended. But that's something to just be prepared for just in case. And once again, same thing like the student. They go through and the parent reviews and signs and submits. Once it's fully submitted, you're going to see it's usually about processed in 1 to 3 business days, and there will be a FAFSA submission summary. It will not be available on the parent account. It will be available on the student account. The student can log back in after they get the email that says it's been processed successfully, and then they can see the full breakdown. But I do recommend that the student follow up with the school they are planning to attend so we can make sure we have the FAFSA, that there aren't any issues with it, because the Department of Ed will expect those corrections to be done through us, through the school, and that it's ready to go. And that's pretty much it. In case you have any additional questions, we provided both of our emails here today. So that way you can always follow up with us. And we thank you so much for your time. And we hope that this was informative and helpful.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us for this tutorial.